You know what? People like you always mistake confidence for competence.
I'm sorry you feel that way, Mr. Harlem. I only intend to present to you the findings accurately.
Reagan Harlem's gaze turned cold. He signaled her to continue. Solana took a steady breath and resumed her presentation, not seeing Reagan approach from behind with his coffee. Before she could react, he tipped the cup forward and poured the hot coffee down her head.
You've got a lot of nerve, standing here and pretending you know more about my business than I do.
Do me a favor and get out of my building!
What Reagan Harlem didn't know was that he had humiliated the wrong woman, whose calmness wasn't weakness, and whose husband was a name spoken only in whispers. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, and Solana Parvin stepped out like she owned the building. She didn't, but she carried herself like she could buy it if she wanted to. Her navy suit caught the light, gold threads running through the fabric like veins. Her leather portfolio was tucked under one arm. She had been up since 5. She had reviewed her proposal 3 times. She was ready. The receptionist at the front desk looked up, looked Solana over, then looked back down at her computer without a word. Solana walked to the desk anyway. Solana Parvin, I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Harlem. The receptionist typed something slowly, like she had all the time in the world. Conference room B. Down the hall, turn left. She didn't look up again. Solana found the room herself. The conference room was enormous, all glass walls and a long mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars. The city spread out behind floor-to-ceiling windows, steel and glass and morning sky. 8 men in expensive suits were already seated. Nobody stood when she walked in. Nobody smiled. One man glanced at her, then turned back to his phone. Another whispered something to the man beside him. Solana set her portfolio on the table and introduced herself. Solana Parvin, Parvin Consulting. Good morning, gentlemen. A few heads nodded. One man in the corner, young, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a loosened tie, gave her a small, careful nod. His name tag read Gavin. He was the only one who looked at her like she was actually a person. The rest of them waited. They were waiting for Harlem. Reagan Harlem arrived at 9:07. He didn't apologize for being late. He walked in talking on his phone, finished his conversation at the head of the table, and sat down without acknowledging Solana at all. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept back from a face that had never once, in 58 years, been told no by anyone who mattered. He wore that fact on him like a second suit. He snapped his fingers at his assistant. Coffee. Then he picked up Solana's proposal, her proposal which his office had requested, which she had spent 3 weeks preparing, and began flipping through it like it was junk mail. Solana began her presentation. Thank you for having me. Based on the acquisition parameters your team outlined, I've developed a 3-phase restructuring framework that I believe will significantly strengthen— Hang on. Harlem didn't look up. He was still flipping pages. Derek, did you get those numbers from the Pearson account? Derek Valentin, seated to Harlem's right, sharp-faced, mid-50s, watching everything, nodded once. Sent them this morning. Good. Harlem finally set the proposal down. He looked at Solana for exactly 2 seconds. Go ahead. Solana kept her voice even. She kept her shoulders back. She had been in rooms like this before. Rooms that didn't want her there. She knew how to breathe through it. She continued. She was 10 minutes in when Harlem interrupted again. That methodology is wrong. Solana paused. Which part, specifically? The whole approach. You're using a margin assumption that doesn't apply here. The margin assumption is based on your Q2 disclosures. Solana said, keeping her voice steady. "The numbers are directly sourced from your own. I know my own numbers." His voice dropped half a degree, not louder, but colder. "I'm telling you, the approach is wrong." Two men at the far end of the table shifted in their seats. One of them, older, gray at his temples, looked down at his hands. He knew she was right. Solana could see it in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Nobody said a word. Solana took a breath, turned to the next slide, and kept going. She had not come this far, had not built a firm from nothing before she was 35, had not fought for every single client and contract and square foot of credibility she had, to be rattled by a man who hadn't even read page 4. She kept going. At the table, the silence wasn't neutral. It was practiced. These men had done this before, sat in this room while Harlem ran over someone, and said absolutely nothing. It was its own kind of participation. Outside, the city hummed 40 floors below. Inside the room, Solana Parvin stood at the head of the table, her voice clear and her notes impeccable, while 8 men in expensive suits waited to see what Harlem would do next. She didn't know yet, but she was about to find out. Harlem pushed back his chair. The legs scraped against the floor. Loud, deliberate, like everything he did. "Let me get a closer look at these charts." He said it to no one in particular, like he was thinking out loud, like Solana wasn't standing right there. He walked around the table slowly. No hurry. This was his room, his building, his city. He had all the time in the world. He stopped directly behind her. Solana didn't move. She kept her eyes on her presentation, her voice steady, her pointer finger indicating the third-quarter projections on the screen. She could feel him behind her, could smell the coffee in his hand, could feel the shift in the room, the way the air changed, the way the men at the table went very, very still. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but something was coming. "The projection model on slide 7, she started. And then it happened. The coffee hit her head like a wave. Hot. Not boiling, but hot enough. It poured down through her hair and dripped down the back of her neck and soaked into her collar. The smell hit her instantly. Dark roast. Bitter. It spread across her shoulders, bled into the gold threads of her navy suit, and dripped from the edge of her portfolio onto the floor. The room went absolutely silent. Not the practiced silence from before. Something else. Something stunned. Even for these men, even for men who had seen Harlem do ugly things in this room, this was something else. Solana stood completely still. She didn't gasp, didn't spin around, didn't make a sound. She stood there with coffee running down her face and dripping off her chin, and she did not move a single muscle. Harlem stepped around to her side, looked at the wet stain spreading across her suit jacket, and said, flat, almost bored, "Oops." He paused. "You were in my way." Then he walked back to his chair and sat down. That was it. No apology, no reaching for a napkin, no acknowledgement that he had just poured hot coffee over another human being in front of 8 witnesses. He sat down, straightened his jacket, and looked at Derek Valentin like nothing had happened. The man at the far end of the table, the one with the gray temples who had looked away earlier, was now staring at the ceiling. His jaw was tight. Another man had his phone out and was looking at the screen with great focus, seeing nothing. Harlem's assistant had taken one careful step backward, like she could quietly remove herself from the blast radius of what had just happened. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved, except Gavin. Gavin, the young analyst in the corner with the tired eyes, slowly, quietly, slid a paper napkin across the table toward Solana. He didn't look at her directly, didn't say a word, just moved it close enough for her to reach. It was the smallest act of decency in the room. It was the only one. Harlem looked at Solana then, really looked at her, for the first time since she had walked in, like she was a problem he had already solved. "You can go," he said. "We'll be using a different firm." Solana reached out and picked up the napkin. She pressed it to her face once, twice, blotted the coffee from her jaw, her neck, the corner of her eye. Then she set the napkin down on the table, carefully, neatly, like she was placing a period at the end of a sentence. She closed her portfolio. She gathered her materials. She did not look at Harlem. She did not look at the men who sat there and watched, and said absolutely nothing. She did not shake. She did not rush. She picked up her things with the same composure she had walked in with, turned from the table, and walked to the door. Nobody said a word. Her heels clicked against the floor, measured even, as she crossed the room. She reached the door, pulled it open, and walked out into the hallway without looking back. The door swung shut behind her. And still, not one man in that room said a single word. The elevator was at the end of the hall. Solana walked toward it without slowing down. She pressed the button. The doors opened immediately, like they had been waiting for her. She stepped in. The doors closed. The floor number ticked down. And only then, alone, in the elevator, with no one watching, did she let out the breath she had been holding for the last 3 minutes. Her hands were trembling, just slightly, just enough to notice. She looked down at them. Then she straightened her fingers, picked up her phone, and called Paris. The parking garage was cold and dim. Solana sat in the driver's seat of her car with the door closed and the engine off. The leather portfolio was on the passenger seat. There was a coffee stain on the cover, dark brown, already beginning to dry at the edges. She hadn't noticed it until now. She stared at it for a moment. Then she dialed Paris. It rang once. "Talk to me," Paris said. No hello. No preamble. That was Paris. She always knew when something was wrong before you said a word. "He poured coffee on me, Pat." Silence. 3 full seconds of it. "He what?" "Stood behind me during my presentation." Solana's voice was controlled, flat and even, like she was reading from a report. "Tipped his cup right over my head, in front of everyone, then told me we were done, and to leave." The sound that came from Paris's end wasn't quite a word. It was something low and sharp, something that came from the chest. Then, "I'm pulling everything we have on Harlem right now. Don't move." Solana heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard through the phone. She leaned her head back against the headrest and looked up at the concrete ceiling of the parking garage. A water stain ran across it in the shape of something she couldn't name. "Okay." Paris's voice shifted, tighter, more focused, the way it always got when she found something. "Okay, Solana." "What?" "This company is bleeding." Solana sat up. "What do you mean?" "I mean Harlem Capital is in serious trouble. Their liquidity numbers don't add up. The Q2 disclosures you used in your proposal, the ones Harlem said were wrong? They weren't wrong, but they were incomplete. Someone's been managing the books very carefully to hide just how bad things actually are." Solana was quiet for a moment. Her mind was already moving, already connecting things. "The consultation," she said slowly, "was never a real consultation," Paris finished. "Solana, I'm looking at a pattern here. 18 months ago, a firm called Vantage Advisory was brought in for a similar engagement. Women-led, 2 partners, both black. They submitted a full restructuring proposal. Harlem's team rejected it, claimed it was substandard. 6 months later, Harlem's internal team rolled out an almost identical framework under a different name. Solana's jaw tightened. "Before that," Paris continued, "a woman named Dr. Reyes ran a boutique consulting firm out of Chicago. Same story. Brought in, humiliated out of the room, proposal stolen. She tried to fight it. Harlem's lawyers buried her in paperwork until she ran out of money and dropped it. The parking garage was very quiet. "He does this," Solana said. It wasn't a question. "He does this," Paris confirmed. And every single time, the target was a woman of color. Every single time, nothing happened to him. A pause. Until now. Solana looked down at her hands in her lap. The trembling had stopped. Something else had replaced it. Something quiet and cold and very, very certain. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a bad day or a rude man in a meeting. This was a system. A deliberate, practiced system for walking women like her into a room, taking what they had, and then making sure they were too humiliated, or too exhausted, or too afraid to do anything about it. The coffee wasn't careless. The coffee was a message. Know your place. Take nothing with you when you leave. "He thought I'd go home," Solana said quietly. "Clean up. Feel ashamed. Let it go." "He thought exactly that," Paris said. There was something in her voice, a hard, bright fury kept carefully in check. "He has always been right before." Solana picked up the coffee-stained portfolio from the passenger seat. She held it in her hands for a moment, felt the damp cover, the warped edges of the documents inside. 3 weeks of work. Careful, precise, excellent work. Work that Reagan Harlem had planned to steal from the moment he invited her into that building. She set it back down. "Pull everything you can find on those 2 prior firms," Solana said. "Document the pattern. I want names, dates, amounts, everything." Already started. "And Paris," she paused. "Don't call anyone else yet." "Who are you calling?" Solana looked at the stain on the portfolio one more time. Then she picked up her phone and scrolled to the contact she needed. One name, no title, no company listed, just Marcus. "My husband," she said. She pressed call. He answered on the first ring. Marcus Parvin listened without making a sound. Not a word, not a breath that she could hear. Just silence on the other end of the line while Solana told him everything. The boardroom, the interruptions, the false correction, the coffee, the napkin, the "you can go." She told it the same way she had told Paris. Flat and controlled, like she was recounting someone else's morning. When she finished, the line stayed quiet. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low. Calm. The kind of calm that had nothing to do with being relaxed. "My pride," she said. Another beat of silence. Then, "I'll be at the office in 20 minutes. He hung up. Solana looked at the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she started the car. Marcus arrived in 19. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The moment the elevator doors opened on Solana's floor, something changed in the office. Like a shift in air pressure before a storm. The 2 junior analysts near the front desk looked up from their screens and went very still. The office manager, a woman named Donna, who had worked for Solana for 4 years and was not easily rattled by anything, straightened in her chair without seeming to realize she'd done it. Paris was standing near the window with a tablet in her hand. When she saw Marcus walk through the glass doors, she lowered the tablet slowly to her side. Paris had known Solana since their late 20s. She had been in the room when Solana signed her first major client. She had held Solana's hand through every hard thing. She was not a woman who frightened easily. But Marcus Parvin was not an easy man to be in a room with. He was tall, not imposing in the loud way some men were, but in the quiet way that was somehow worse. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, a white shirt open at the collar. No jewelry except a watch. He didn't look around the office when he walked in. He didn't take stock of the room or make anyone feel his arrival. He simply walked to where Solana was standing near her office door and stopped in front of her. He looked at her face first, then at the coffee stain on her blouse, dried now, brown against the gold threading of her suit. He looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then he raised one hand and touched her face. Just once. His thumb against her cheekbone. Gentle as anything. His expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes, deep and still, like water over a very strong current. He dropped his hand. "Tell me the room," he said. "Everyone in it," Solana told him. He listened the same way he had on the phone, completely still, completely present, missing nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then Paris stepped forward and turned her tablet toward him. "There's more," she said. She walked him through what she had found. The pattern, the prior firms, the stolen frameworks, the women who had come before Solana and been buried under paperwork and shame until they gave up. Marcus looked at the screen. He read carefully. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both about dates, and then he handed the tablet back to Paris and said nothing for a long moment. The office was very quiet. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said finally. He looked at Solana. "Tomorrow morning, you file a formal complaint with Harlem Capital's HR department. Your attorney sends a certified letter. The incident, the intellectual property issue, the pattern of prior conduct, everything documented, everything above board." Solana studied him. "And if they ignore it?" "They won't ignore it." He paused. "They'll do something worse than ignore it." She understood him completely. She had been married to this man for 11 years. She knew the architecture of how he thought, the patience of it, the precision. He wasn't telling her to file a complaint because he believed Harlem's HR department would do the right thing. He was telling her to file it because he needed Harlem to respond. Because the response, whatever ugly form it took, would be the thing that set everything else in motion. "Give them the rope," he was saying without saying it. "Let them choose to use it. You want them to refuse," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her steadily. "I want them to be exactly who they are." A pause. "Because when they are, what comes next is clean." Paris looked between the two of them and said nothing. Outside, the city moved at its usual pace, loud and indifferent, and completely unaware that something had just begun. The complaint was filed at 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. Solana sat at her desk and watched her attorney, a precise woman named Camille Watson, submit the formal HR complaint to Harlem Capital's Employee Relations Department via certified electronic delivery. A hard copy went out by courier at the same time. Signed, dated, time-stamped. The legal letter followed 10 minutes later. It was 4 pages long and it said everything. The incident, the date, the time, the witnesses present, the deliberate theft of intellectual property, Solana's restructuring framework, brought to the meeting in good faith and targeted for appropriation without credit or compensation. The pattern of prior conduct, Vantage Advisory, Dr. Reyes's firm, the dates, the amounts, the names. Paris had built a clean, documented timeline that was difficult to look at and impossible to dismiss. Camille had attached everything. "Now we wait," Camille said, closing her laptop. "We won't wait long," Solana said. She was right. 46 hours later, on Friday morning, the response arrived. Not an apology. Not a request for a meeting. Not even a form letter from HR acknowledging receipt of the complaint. A lawsuit. Camille called at 7:52 in the morning, before Solana had finished her first cup of coffee. "They've filed," she said. Her voice was controlled, but tight at the edges. "Preemptive defamation claim. Filed last night in civil court." Solana set her cup down. "Read it to me." Camille read. The filing claimed that Solana's complaint was a deliberate bad faith attempt to damage Reagan Harlem's reputation in the days immediately preceding a major IPO announcement. It described her as a disgruntled contractor who had been professionally dismissed after delivering substandard work. It used the word extortion twice. It used the word fabricated 3 times. And then came the affidavits, 3 of them. Sworn statements from men who had been sitting in that boardroom. All 3 said the same thing, that the coffee spill was an accident, that Mr. Harlem had simply lost his grip on the cup, that there was no malicious intent. And all 3 said something else, something that made Solana's vision go briefly white at the edges. All 3 stated that following the incident, Solana Parvin had become verbally aggressive and threatening toward Mr. Harlem and his team, and that they had felt personally uncomfortable and unsafe. Solana sat with the phone pressed to her ear and said nothing for a moment. She had not said a single word in that room after the coffee hit her head. Not one word. She had blotted her face, gathered her things, and walked out. Every person in that room knew it. Every person in that room had watched it happen, and 3 of them had just sworn otherwise. Under oath. "Solana," Camille said carefully, "are you there?" "I'm here. I want you to understand what this means strategically. If this suit proceeds, my clients will pull their contracts." Solana said it before Camille could. The firm takes on the reputation of being litigious. Anyone considering bringing us in for a major engagement will hesitate. We lose ground we spent years building. She paused. "That's the point." "Yes," Camille said quietly. "That's the point." Solana stood up from her desk and walked to the window. The city was busy below. People moving, cars moving, the whole machine running without any awareness of what was happening up here on the 14th floor of a building it would never think about. Harlem wasn't just defending himself. He had looked at the complaint, looked at the documentation, looked at the pattern that Paris had carefully assembled, and he had decided that the best defense was a full assault. Bury her. Discredit her. Make her look like the aggressor. Make the story about her behavior instead of his. He had done it before. She understood that now with absolute clarity. This was the part of the system she hadn't seen from the outside. The counterpunch, fast and overwhelming, designed to make the target spend everything they had just staying upright. It had worked before. He believed it would work again. Solana turned from the window. Paris was standing in the office doorway, tablet in hand, having clearly heard enough from Camille's side of the call to know what had happened. Her expression was tight, with a fury she was working hard to hold in place. "Get Marcus on the phone," Solana said. "Already calling him," Paris said. Solana looked back out at the city one more time. Her jaw was set. Her hands were steady. Reagan Harlem had just made his move. Now it was her turn. The story broke by Thursday morning. Solana saw it first on her phone at 6:45, before she had left the bedroom. The notification came through a business news alert she had set up years ago, the kind that tracked major litigation filings in the financial sector. She had forgotten she'd set it up for Harlem Capital after Paris found the liquidity issues. She almost wished she hadn't. The headline read, "Consultant Files Harassment. Claim Against Harlem Capital CEO Days Before Historic IPO." She read it once. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. Marcus was already awake. He was always already awake, and she could hear him moving quietly in the kitchen below. She picked the phone back up and read the article in full. It was worse than the headline. The piece was careful, legally careful. No outright lies, no names of witnesses, nothing that could be directly challenged. But the framing was surgical. Harlem was described as a pioneering business leader on the verge of the city's most anticipated IPO in a decade. Solana was described as a consultant who had been engaged briefly and whose engagement had ended before completion. The word claim appeared 7 times. The word alleged appeared 4. Her name was in the headline. His was in the subheading, surrounded by the language of achievement and legacy. The photo they used of Harlem was from a children's hospital charity gala. He was smiling. The photo they used of Solana was from a finance conference 2 years ago. She was mid-sentence, one hand raised, mouth open. Out of context, in this story, she looked exactly like what they wanted her to look like. She set the phone down again. The client calls started before 9. First was a mid-size investment firm that had been with Parvin Consulting for 3 years, a reliable account, good people, always paid on time. The managing partner called personally. He was apologetic, genuinely uncomfortable, clearly hating the conversation he was having. He asked Solana to pause active work on their account, pending resolution of the legal matter. He used the word optics twice. She thanked him and hung up. The second call was less kind. A corporate restructuring group whose lead partner had always been just a little too comfortable dismissing Solana's recommendations in meetings. He didn't call personally. He had his assistant do it. The message was brief. They were canceling their contract, effective immediately. No explanation beyond a change in direction. The third cancellation came by email. No call. Just a 3-line message from the CEO of a regional bank she had worked with for 18 months. In light of recent developments, we have decided to move our consulting needs in-house. Paris brought Solana the printout personally. She set it on the desk without a word. Her eyes said everything. By noon, 2 more accounts had gone quiet. Not canceling yet, but not returning calls either. The waiting was its own kind of message. Marcus arrived at the office just after 2. He sat across from Solana's desk and listened while she and Paris walked him through the morning. The article, the calls, the pattern of it. He didn't interrupt. He looked at the headlines on Paris's tablet, read the article once, set the tablet down. "Let it play one more day," he said. Paris stared at him. "One more day? She's losing clients." "I know what she's losing," Marcus said. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. That was the thing about Marcus. He never needed volume. One more day. He looked at Solana. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. After Marcus left, he made 2 calls from the car. The first was to Rachel Golden, his attorney, formidable and relentless, instructing her to begin building Solana's countercase immediately. Document everything. Prepare for a full counterfiling. The second call was to a man named Elias. Elias was not the kind of man whose name appeared on any organizational chart. He was quiet, efficient, and completely loyal to Marcus Parvin. Marcus gave him one name, Gavin, the junior analyst from the boardroom, and one instruction: find him, approach him carefully, and ask if he would be willing to speak with someone off the record about what he witnessed that morning. That evening, Elias made contact with Gavin outside his apartment building. He was calm, polite, and completely unthreatening. He simply asked. Gavin, who had spent 3 days carrying the weight of what he had watched happen in that conference room, said yes without hesitating. That night, Solana didn't sleep. Marcus stayed. Rachel Golden filed the motion on Friday morning. It was precise, well-argued, and airtight. The motion called for the defamation lawsuit to be dismissed on the grounds that it was retaliatory, a direct legal response to a legitimate discrimination complaint, filed with the clear intent to intimidate and financially damage the complainant. Rachel had attached documentation of the prior incidents involving Vantage Advisory and Dr. Reyes's firm. She had attached the timeline Paris built. She had attached everything. It was, by any reasonable legal standard, a strong motion. The judge assigned to the case was the Honorable Franklin Blair. Solana learned this on Friday afternoon, when Camille Watson called with the case assignment. There was a particular quality to Camille's silence after she said the name, a pause just long enough to communicate everything she wasn't saying out loud. "Blair," Solana repeated. "Yes. Tell me about him." Camille chose her words with care. "He's been on the bench for 14 years, well regarded in certain circles. He has ruled in Harlem's favor in 2 prior civil matters, once in 2019, once in 2021. Both cases involved Harlem Capital's real estate division. Both rulings were favorable in ways that raised some eyebrows at the time. But nothing was ever done about it. Nothing was ever proven," Camille said. Which was not the same thing, and both women knew it. Blair scheduled the preliminary hearing for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks was a long time. Long enough for the PR campaign against Solana to do serious damage. Long enough for more clients to quietly disappear. Long enough for the story to calcify in the public mind. Consultant versus CEO. Allegation versus denial. Her word against his, and every institution in the city lined up behind him. The scheduling alone was a message. But then Blair did something worse. On Monday morning, a business reporter at the city's largest daily newspaper published a brief item in her column. The kind of column that powerful men use to send signals to each other. The item noted that the Harlem defamation case had been assigned to Judge Blair, and included a quote from a source described only as a legal observer familiar with the matter. The quote read, "This case raises serious questions about the growing use of litigation as a financial leverage tool, particularly in the period before major market events." The source was not named. The implication was unmistakable. Solana read it at her desk and felt the particular cold clarity that comes when you understand exactly what you're dealing with. This wasn't a judge applying the law. This was a system protecting itself, announcing, in the polite language that powerful men used when they wanted to be understood without being quoted, that the outcome had already been decided. Paris printed the column and laid it on Solana's desk without a word. By Tuesday, Valentin had deployed his second weapon. The reputation management firm he hired was discreet, expensive, and very good at what it did. They didn't run attack ads. They didn't make accusations. They were far too sophisticated for that. Instead, stories began appearing. Small ones, scattered across business blogs and industry newsletters and comment sections that the right people read. Anonymous sources. Always anonymous. One piece described a former client, unnamed, who characterized working with Parvin Consulting as difficult and combative. Another mentioned, almost in passing, that Solana was reportedly under investigation by a financial regulatory body. No body was named, no details were given. Because there were no details, there was no investigation. It was a fabrication, thin as smoke, designed not to be believed entirely, but simply to exist. To be the thing someone mentioned when Solana's name came up. "Oh, I heard there was some kind of investigation. I don't know the details." That was enough. In the world Solana operated in, that was more than enough. By Wednesday, 2 more clients had gone quiet. An introduction that Paris had been carefully cultivating for 6 months, a potential major account, the kind that would have set the firm up for the next 3 years, went cold without explanation. The contact simply stopped responding to emails. 11 people worked at Parvin Consulting. 11 people who had mortgages and car payments and children in school. 11 people who had chosen to build something with Solana because they believed in what she was building. Solana sat in her office Wednesday evening and looked at the staff roster on her screen. She looked at it for a long time. Then she closed her laptop, turned off her desk lamp, and sat in the dark. She didn't cry, but she sat there for a very long time. Paris found her at 7:15. The office was empty by then. Everyone else had gone home. The cleaning crew hadn't come through yet. The only light in the room came from the city outside the window, the glow of buildings and streetlights filtering through the glass and laying itself across the floor in long, pale strips. Solana was in her chair, portfolio closed on the desk in front of her, hands folded, sitting completely still in the dark like she had been there for a while and planned to stay a while longer. Paris stood in the doorway for a moment. She didn't turn the lights on. She just walked in, pulled the chair from the other side of the desk around to Solana's side, and sat down next to her. For a minute, neither of them said anything. Outside, the city moved. Far below, a horn sounded and faded. Somewhere in the building, an elevator hummed. The world kept going at its regular pace, indifferent and relentless, completely unbothered by what was happening on the 14th floor. "Talk to me," Paris said finally. Solana looked out at the city. "I'm thinking about Donna." Paris waited. "She's been with me 4 years. Has 2 kids. The younger one starts middle school next fall." Solana's voice was quiet and even. "Matthew Jr. On the 2nd floor. Been saving up to propose to his girlfriend. He told me about the ring 3 weeks ago." A pause. "Lexi in accounting has her mother living with her. Sends money home every month." Paris was quiet. "I built this place," Solana said. "I built it before I was 35, from nothing, without anyone handing me a single thing. And now, a man who poured coffee on my head is going to take it apart piece by piece, and the whole city is just going to watch it happen." The silence sat between them for a moment. Then Paris leaned forward. "Marcus could end this tonight." She said it carefully, like she was setting something fragile on a table. "You know he could. One phone call, and Harlem wouldn't know what hit him?" "No." Solana said it without hesitation. Not loud. Not angry. Just firm as concrete. Paris looked at her. "Solana," I said no. She turned to face Paris fully now. In the low light from the window, her expression was steady and clear. "I need you to understand something. I have spent over a decade walking into rooms that were not built for me, rooms that didn't want me there. I have earned every single client on that roster, every contract, every square foot of this office, with my own work and my own name." She paused. "If Marcus makes a call and this disappears overnight, whose victory is that?" Paris opened her mouth. "It's not mine," Solana said. "It's his name, his power, and I love him for wanting to use it. But I will not let Reagan Harlem be the reason my victory gets credited to someone else." She turned back to the window. "I need this to be mine. I need the truth to be what wins, not fear, not muscle. The truth." Paris sat back. She looked at her best friend, this woman she had known since they were young and broke and building something out of sheer will, and she didn't argue, because she understood, and because Solana was right. Neither of them heard Marcus come in. He had a key to the building. He had always had a key, had insisted on it years ago without making a production of it. He appeared in the office doorway without a sound, still in his suit from whatever he had been doing that evening, and stood there in the dark looking at the two of them. He had heard enough. Paris saw him first. She looked at him for a moment, then stood, picked up her bag, and said goodnight to Solana. She passed Marcus in the doorway without a word. He stepped aside to let her through. Then he walked into the office and sat in the chair Paris had vacated. He didn't speak right away. He looked at Solana the way he always looked at her, fully, without distraction, like she was the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. Solana looked back at him. "You heard." "Enough," he said. A long moment passed between them. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not retreat, not defeat, but a quiet recalibration. The kind that happened when a very precise man encountered information that changed the parameters of his plan without changing his destination. He had married a woman who built an empire before 35, with nothing but her own hands and her own name. He knew who she was. He had always known. He would not touch the center of this fight, but he would make sure the road stayed clear. He reached over and took her hand in the dark. "Let's go home," he said. Solana looked at the city one last time. Then she stood, picked up her portfolio, and walked out with her husband. The office stayed dark behind them. 3 days passed. They were not easy days. 2 more client accounts went formally quiet. No cancellations, but no returned calls either, which in the business world amounted to the same thing. The industry newsletter that had run the anonymous investigation story was picked up by a larger outlet and reposted without any additional fact-checking. Solana's name appeared in it again, still attached to an investigation that did not exist. Paris monitored everything. She kept a running document, every mention, every cancellation, every silence, and updated it without comment, because commenting would have required language she was trying not to use in the office. Solana worked. She came in every morning, sat at her desk, and did the work that remained to be done. She returned calls. She met with her 2 remaining active clients. She reviewed contracts. She did not let the office feel like a sinking ship, because 11 people were watching her to decide how they should feel, and she refused to give them anything to be afraid of. But at night, alone, she felt the walls getting closer. On the 4th day after Marcus's visit, Elias arranged the meeting. It was held at a small Italian restaurant in a quiet neighborhood 40 minutes from the financial district. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths and a host who didn't ask questions. Rachel Golden arrived first and took a corner booth. Solana had asked to be there. Marcus had said yes without hesitating. Gavin arrived 7 minutes late, slightly out of breath, wearing a jacket that didn't quite fit like his work suits did. He was younger looking outside the office, maybe 28, 29. Without the Harlem capital environment pressing down on him, he looked like what he actually was, a decent young man who had been working somewhere that made him feel small for 3 years too long. He slid into the booth across from Rachel and looked at Solana. "I watched it happen," he said. Before hello. Before anything. Like he had been rehearsing the sentence the entire drive over and needed to get it out. "I want you to know that I know what I saw. He did it on purpose. Everyone in that room knows he did it on purpose." "I know," Solana said quietly. "Thank you for being here." Gavin looked down at the table. "I should have said something. In the room, I should have stood up and said something, and I didn't. And I've been thinking about that every single day since it happened." He paused. "The napkin was... I know it wasn't enough. I know that. It was something," Solana said. "In a room full of nothing. It was something." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and nodded. Rachel set her pen on the table. "Gavin, you mentioned to Elias that you had documentation. Can you walk us through what you have?" Gavin reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper, a printed index, organized by date. He had been methodical about it. Over 3 years at Harlem Capital, he had quietly preserved an internal email thread that he had stumbled across during a routine filing task and had never been able to unsee. He slid the index across the table. Rachel looked at it. Her expression didn't change. But she went very still in the way that attorneys go still when they are looking at something significant. The thread spanned 18 months. It involved Harlem, Valentine, and 3 senior members of the executive team. It documented, in their own words, the deliberate strategy of targeting outside consultants, specifically women-led firms, for intellectual property appropriation. Bring them in. Extract the framework. humiliate them out of the room before they could establish a paper trail of contribution, rely on their reluctance to fight back publicly. They had done it to Vantage Advisory. They had done it to Dr. Reyes. They had done it to 2 other firms that Paris hadn't even found yet. But the emails didn't stop there. Buried deeper in the thread, in a series of exchanges between Harlem and Valentine from 8 months ago, was something that made Rachel set the index down and look up at Gavin with an expression that was no longer neutral. The IPO. The upcoming, historic, city-defining IPO that Harlem had built his entire public image around. It was built on falsified internal audits. The liquidity crisis was not being managed. It was being hidden. Deliberately, systematically, illegally hidden from every investor who had been told this company was healthy. "This is securities fraud," Rachel said, quietly, precisely, like she was identifying a species. Gavin nodded. "I know what it is. That's why I kept it." Silence settled over the table. Solana looked at the index in Rachel's hands. 3 years of someone doing the right thing in the dark, waiting for the moment it would matter. "Gavin," she said, "would you be willing to cooperate fully?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." Rachel was already reaching for her phone. The news broke on a Friday morning. Solana was at her desk when Paris burst through the office door without knocking, which Paris never did, holding her phone out like it was on fire. "Turn on the news," Paris said. "Right now." Solana turned it on. Every major financial outlet was running the same story. The chirons were variations of the same headline, cycling across the bottom of every screen. SEC opens formal inquiry into Harlem Capital Group. IPO suspended pending investigation. The anchor was speaking quickly, the way news anchors spoke when a story was still breaking and the details were still arriving faster than they could be processed. Harlem Capital's stock had already dropped 22% in pre-market trading and was falling. The IPO, the historic, city-defining event that Harlem had been building toward for 2 years, was suspended indefinitely. 2 board members had already submitted resignations by 8 in the morning. Paris made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Solana sat very still and watched the screen. By noon, the stock had dropped 34%. A 3rd board member resigned. Harlem Capital's main investor relations firm released a terse statement saying they were cooperating with authorities. It was the kind of statement that meant the opposite of what it said. Solana's phone started ringing at 10:30. The first call was from the investment firm that had asked her to pause work 3 weeks ago. The managing partner, the one who had used the word optics twice and clearly hated himself for it, called personally. He was warm, almost effusive, stumbling slightly over his apology in a way that told her he had been rehearsing it. He wanted to resume their engagement. Immediately. At whatever terms she felt were appropriate. She thanked him, told him she'd have Paris follow up on Monday. The second call was from a firm she had never worked with, a major one of the biggest in the city. The kind of firm that did not make cold calls to consultants. They were calling to express interest in scheduling an introductory meeting. Paris, standing in the doorway listening to the second call, pressed both hands to her face. By 3 in the afternoon, 4 more calls had come in. 3 were existing clients who had gone quiet, returning with the energy of people who had never left. 1 was new, another firm she had been trying to get a meeting with for 2 years. That evening, Solana and Marcus sat at the kitchen table and let themselves feel it. Just for 1 evening. Paris came over, and they opened a bottle of wine and sat together in the warm light of the kitchen and breathed for the first time in 3 weeks. It felt like victory. It felt, finally and completely, like the right side had won. Sunday morning arrived cold and gray. Solana was awake early, sitting at the kitchen counter with coffee and her laptop, reviewing a proposal for one of the returning clients. Marcus had gone for a run. The house was quiet. Her phone rang at 8:47. Rachel. Solana answered immediately. "Tell me." Rachel's voice was controlled, but there was something under the control. Something careful and tight. Valentin made a deal. The kitchen went very quiet. He approached the FBI Friday evening, Rachel continued, before they came to him. He's offering full testimony against Harlem in exchange for immunity. Securities fraud, the whole picture. "That's good," Solana said slowly. "That should be good." "It should be," Rachel paused. "But there's something else in the testimony. Valentin is claiming that the emails Gavin provided were not obtained legitimately. He's saying they were stolen from Harlem's private server by an outside party." Another pause, heavier this time. He named Elias. The coffee in Solana's cup had gone cold without her noticing. "And Elias works for Marcus," she said. "Yes." Solana set the cup down carefully. "What does that mean for the emails? If the claim holds and the emails were unlawfully obtained, they become inadmissible. The federal fraud case loses its primary documentary evidence." Rachel's voice stayed even. "The defamation suit is viable again. Without the emails, we're back to your word against 3 sworn affidavits." Solana stood up from the counter. She walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty, the sky low and gray and pressing down on everything. "There's more," Rachel said. "Tell me." "There are whispers coming from inside the FBI field office. Someone has decided this is the moment to look at Marcus. Not for Elias, not for the emails. For everything." The words landed like stones. Solana understood what it meant. In trying to protect his wife through careful, measured action, Marcus had stepped just far enough into the light to be seen. 20 years of invisible precision, and her fight had pulled him into the open. She heard the front door open. Marcus returning from his run. She turned from the window, looked at him standing in the hallway, slightly breathless, looking back at her with an expression that changed the moment he saw her face. "Rachel's on the phone," she said quietly. He closed the door behind him. "Put it on speaker," he said. Marcus listened to Rachel without moving. He stood in the hallway still in his running clothes, phone between them on the kitchen counter, and he listened to every word. His breathing had slowed from the run. His face was still. He asked no questions until Rachel finished, and when she finished he asked 2, both precise, both about the specific language of Valentin's immunity agreement, and then he thanked her and told her he would call her back within the hour. Solana ended the call. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the gray Sunday sky sat low over the city, pressing down on everything like a lid. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The kitchen that had felt warm and full 2 nights ago, wine and Paris and the relief of breathing again, felt different now, smaller. The table between them felt wider than it was. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down. Solana sat across from him. There was a moment, long and heavy, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, where they simply looked at each other. This was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. Not broken, not afraid, but tired in the specific way that men who never stop carrying things look tired when the weight shifts unexpectedly. He had spent 20 years building something invisible and impenetrable, 20 years of patience and precision, and never once being seen. And now someone was looking directly at him. "You should have let me handle it," he said, quietly, without accusation. The words came out like something he had been holding and finally set down. Not a weapon, just a weight. Solana looked at him steadily. "I know." The honesty of it, no defense, no justification, seemed to land somewhere important. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face. "I'm not done," she said. He was quiet. I spent Sunday night going through Valentin's deal, she continued. She reached across the table and opened the laptop she had brought from the counter. Not Harlem's exposure. Valentin's. The structure of his immunity agreement. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Valentin didn't flip because he was afraid, Solana said. He flipped because Harlem was going to cut him out. She turned the laptop so Marcus could see the screen. Financial records, corporate filings, a compensation structure she had spent the night reconstructing from public documents. Before the IPO closed, Harlem had been quietly restructuring the executive compensation package. Valentin was being removed from the equity pool. $40 million he had been counting on for 2 years. Gone. Harlem wasn't just going to humiliate him. He was going to rob him. Marcus looked at the screen, then at Solana. So Valentin didn't go to the FBI out of conscience, he said. Valentin went to the FBI because Harlem did to him exactly what he helped Harlem do to everyone else. She paused. There's no honor in it, but there's a crack. She pulled up a second document. The immunity agreement covers Valentin's testimony about securities fraud. That's it. That is the full scope of what the agreement protects him from. She looked at Marcus directly. It says nothing about the defamation lawsuit. It says nothing about the 3 perjured affidavits from the boardroom witnesses. Marcus went very still. 3 men submitted sworn statements claiming I was verbally aggressive, Solana said. I didn't say a word in that room after the coffee hit me. Not one word. Every person present knows that. And one of those 3 men, the CFO, had a conversation with Paris at a conference 6 months before the incident. He emailed her the next day, called me remarkably impressive, mentioned he'd never met me in person. She let that sit for a moment. He swore under oath that he found me threatening. In a room where, by his own written admission, he had never been in the same space as me before. She closed the laptop gently. That is perjury. Clean, documentable, indefensible perjury. The kitchen was completely silent. Marcus looked at the closed laptop. Then he looked at his wife. This woman who had been awake all night, alone at the kitchen counter, following money and language and legal architecture while the city slept, who had taken the worst setback of the entire ordeal and spent it building a way forward. He reached across the table, slid the laptop toward him, opened it, read everything she had found. Then he looked up, and for the first time since Sunday morning, the tiredness in his face was replaced by something else entirely. Something precise, something patient, something that had been waiting a very long time to be used. A slow, careful smile crossed his face. Rachel needs to file the perjury complaint, he said. Monday morning, Solana said. He nodded once. Then he stood, walked around the table and put his hand on her shoulder. I'll make the calls, he said quietly. She looked up at him. Make them count. I always do, he said. Monday arrived sharp and cold. Solana was at her desk by 7:30. Paris came in at 7:45 carrying 2 coffees and a look on her face that said she hadn't slept much either. She set 1 cup in front of Solana without a word, sat down across from her, and opened her laptop. Tell me what you need, Paris said. The CFO, Solana said. His name is Gordon Marsh. I need everything you have on any interaction we've ever had with him. Conferences, emails, introductions, mutual contacts. Everything! Paris was already typing. Give me 20 minutes. Solana worked while she waited. She reviewed the perjury complaint that Rachel had drafted overnight. Rachel, who had apparently also not slept, who had sent a completed 14-page document at 5:47 in the morning with a single line of accompanying text. Ready to file on your instruction. The complaint was precise and devastating. It laid out the timeline clearly. Gordon Marsh, Chief Financial Officer of Harlem Capital Group, had submitted a sworn affidavit in a civil defamation case stating that he had personally observed Solana Parvin behave in a verbally aggressive and threatening manner during a meeting on October the 15th. The affidavit implied direct personal familiarity with Solana's behavior and demeanor. The complaint argued that this statement was knowingly false and constituted criminal perjury under state law. It was a strong argument, but arguments needed evidence. Paris found it in 18 minutes. She appeared in the office doorway holding her laptop open with both hands, like she was carrying something that might spill. Her expression was the particular kind of controlled that meant she was feeling something large and was managing it carefully. 6 months ago, Paris said, walking to Solana's desk, the Midwest Regional Finance Summit, Chicago. You couldn't go. You had the Henderson acquisition closing that week. I went alone to represent the firm. Solana nodded. She remembered. Gordon Marsh was there. He was on a panel about corporate liquidity management. Paris set the laptop on the desk and turned it toward Solana. We had drinks after the panel with a group of about 12 people. He was charming. Funny, actually. We talked for almost 40 minutes. At some point, I mentioned your name. Said you were my partner. Said you had built the firm. Paris tapped the screen. He emailed me 2 days later. Solana looked at the email. It was warm and professional, the kind of follow-up message people sent after a good conference conversation. It mentioned the evening, mentioned the panel, mentioned Paris, and then, near the bottom, in a paragraph about the consulting landscape, Gordon Marsh had written, I was particularly struck by what you shared about your partner, Ms. Parvin. Building a firm of that caliber before 35, in this market, is genuinely remarkable. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her personally, but based on everything you described, she sounds like exactly the kind of operator this industry needs more of. Solana read it twice. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her personally. Gordon Marsh, in his own words. 6 months before, he swore under oath that he had personally witnessed Solana Parvin behaving in a threatening and aggressive manner in a room he had never shared with her before that morning. The silence in the office was absolute. He wrote it himself, Paris said. Her voice was very even. The evenness of someone managing something volcanic. Nobody asked him to. He just wrote it in an email with a timestamp. Solana sat back in her chair slowly. She thought about that boardroom, about standing there with coffee running down her face while 8 men looked at ceilings and phones and the middle distance, about walking out without a word, about Gordon Marsh, charming, funny Gordon Marsh, who had spoken so warmly about her at a conference bar in Chicago, sitting at that table and saying absolutely nothing, and then signing his name to a lie. Send it to Rachel, Solana said. Right now? Paris had already pulled up the email. Sending. She hit the button. Done. Solana picked up her phone and called Rachel directly. 1 ring. I just received it, Rachel said. She had clearly been waiting. This is Exhibit A. I'm filing the perjury complaint this morning. The moment it lands, Marsh's personal attorney is going to know his client has a serious problem. How long before he reacts? A man facing criminal perjury charges with no immunity deal and no allies? Rachel paused. Before end of business today. She was right. At 4:53 in the afternoon, Rachel's office received a call from a private attorney representing Gordon Marsh, CFO of Harlem Capital Group. The attorney's tone was carefully neutral, the tone of someone whose client had just realized exactly how alone he was. He wanted to discuss the affidavit. Rachel called Solana immediately. The first crack just became a fault line, she said. Solana looked out at the city. The afternoon light was cutting low across the buildings, turning everything gold. Good, she said. Let it split. Marcus made the first call at 8 o'clock Tuesday morning. He was in his home office. A quiet room at the back of the house. Dark wood and clean lines, no clutter. A single lamp on the desk. The city was still gray outside the window, the kind of early morning gray that hadn't decided yet whether it would burn off or stay. He sat behind the desk in a white shirt, no jacket, and dialed a number he had not dialed in 12 years. It rang 3 times. "Elizabeth," he said. A pause on the other end. Long enough to mean something? Federal Judge Elizabeth Marsh, no relation to the CFO, had a reputation for being unshakable. She had been on the federal bench for 16 years. She had presided over cases that would have rattled most judges and had done so without visible strain. She was, by every public measure, a woman of complete composure and iron principle. But Marcus Parvin had a file. 12 years ago, Judge Marsh had presided over a custody case. A private matter, never publicized, buried under layers of sealed records and legal discretion. The decision she had made in that case had not been her finest moment. It had not been corrupt, exactly, but it had been influenced. Quietly, carefully influenced by a man who had needed a particular outcome and had found a particular way to ask for it. That man had owed Marcus Parvin a favor. The favor had been called in. Judge Marsh had spent 12 years hoping that file stayed closed. "I need one thing," Marcus said. His voice was the same as it always was, low, unhurried, carrying the particular weight of a man who had never once needed to repeat himself. "Blair needs to come off the Parvin case. Today. And I need someone clean in his place." The silence on Judge Marsh's end was long and careful. "I can't directly influence case assignments," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to influence anything," Marcus said. "I'm asking you to make a call to the right person and share a concern about the appearance of impartiality. Given Blair's prior rulings on matters involving Harlem Capital." A pause. "That's a legitimate concern. It's the kind of concern a sitting federal judge raises all the time." Another silence. "The file stays closed," she said. "It wasn't a question. It has always been closed," Marcus said. "I have never had any reason to open it." The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. By Tuesday afternoon, Judge Franklin Blair had been quietly recused from the Parvin defamation case on the grounds of a potential conflict of interest. No announcement. No press release. A simple reassignment in the court's internal system, the kind of administrative adjustment that happened every day and attracted no attention. The replacement assigned was Judge Amira Coleman. Solana looked up Judge Coleman's record that evening and felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in weeks. Coleman had spent 11 years as a civil rights attorney before her appointment to the bench. She had never ruled in favor of Harlem or any of his associates in any matter. She did not attend the same charity galas. She did not belong to the same clubs. She was, by every measure, exactly what her title was supposed to mean. An honest judge. Marcus made the second call Wednesday morning. Councilman Brad Finley had been in Harlem's pocket for 6 years. He had voted in Harlem's favor on 3 rezoning proposals that had made Harlem's real estate holdings worth significantly more than they would otherwise have been. He had done this quietly, efficiently, and had been compensated in the ways that men like Harlem compensated men like Finley. Not with envelopes of cash, but with introductions, with opportunities, with the kind of access that turned into money over time. Finley had also, over those same 6 years, made 3 decisions that had nothing to do with Harlem and everything to do with Marcus Parvin. Small decisions. The kind that left marks. Marcus called him at 9 in the morning. "The rezoning vote," Marcus said. "The Harlem commercial development proposal. I need it tabled." Finley's voice was careful and a little breathless, the way it always was when Marcus called. "For how long?" "Indefinitely," Marcus said. Call it a review, infrastructure concerns, environmental assessment. Pick something that sounds reasonable. Marcus, the vote is scheduled for Brad. Just the name, nothing else. A pause. I'll table it tomorrow morning, Finley said. Thank you, Marcus said. He hung up. By Wednesday afternoon, the rezoning vote had been formally tabled by Councilman Finley, citing the need for an extended environmental impact review. Harlem's real estate division, already bleeding from the SEC inquiry, absorbed another blow. $200 million in projected value, frozen indefinitely. Thursday morning, Gordon Marsh submitted a corrected affidavit. His attorney had negotiated carefully with Rachel, and the correction was complete. A full retraction of the prior sworn statement, acknowledging that the original affidavit contained inaccuracies regarding his personal observations of Solana Parvin's behavior. The language was legal and sanitized, the language of a man being careful not to incriminate himself further while still dismantling the lie he had told. It didn't matter how carefully it was worded. What mattered was that it existed. Within hours of Marsh's retraction, the attorneys representing the other two affidavit signatories contacted Rachel's office independently, within 40 minutes of each other. Both wanted to discuss their clients' sworn statements. Both used the word clarification. By end of Thursday, all three affidavits had crumbled. Rachel called Solana at 6 in the evening. "The boardroom is empty," she said. "There is nobody left defending him." Solana was standing at her office window when the call came. The city was lit up below her, all those lights burning against the dark like something that refused to go out. "Good," she said softly. She stayed at the window for a long time after the call ended. Not celebrating. Not yet. Just breathing. Judge Amira Coleman read her ruling aloud. She didn't have to. Judges weren't required to read rulings aloud in open court for civil motions. Most didn't. They filed the document, the clerks distributed it, the attorneys read it in their offices. But Judge Coleman had requested that both parties be present in the courtroom on Friday morning, and when she took her seat at the bench, she had a printed copy of her ruling in her hand, and she read every word of it out loud, slowly and clearly, in a courtroom that was completely silent. Solana sat at the plaintiff's table with Rachel beside her. She kept her hands folded in her lap. She kept her face still. She looked at Judge Coleman, and she listened. The ruling dismissed the defamation lawsuit with prejudice. With prejudice meant it was over. Permanently. Harlem could not refile, could not adjust the complaint and try again, could not find a friendlier courtroom and take another run at it. The door was closed and locked, and Judge Coleman had thrown away the key. But the dismissal was only the beginning of what Coleman read. The ruling included, unusually, deliberately, an extended written observation from the bench. Coleman noted that the lawsuit had been filed within 48 hours of a legitimate discrimination complaint and an intellectual property theft allegation. She noted the speed of the filing, the content of the affidavits, and the subsequent retraction of all three sworn statements. She used the phrase pattern of retaliatory conduct twice. She used the phrase abuse of civil process once. She included in the official court record, permanently, publicly, findable by anyone who looked, a statement that the evidence suggested the suit had been filed not to seek legitimate legal remedy, but to silence, discredit, and financially damage a complainant who had raised serious and credible concerns. Every word of it was now part of the public record. Every word of it would follow Reagan Harlem for the rest of his professional life. When Coleman finished reading, she set the document down, looked at the room over the top of her glasses, and said, "This court is adjourned." She stood. The clerk called the room to order, and that was it. Rachel leaned toward Solana and said quietly, "It's done." Solana nodded once. She didn't trust herself to speak just yet. The same afternoon, the SEC filed formal securities fraud charges against Reagan Harlem and Harlem Capital Group. The charges were comprehensive: falsified internal audits, misrepresentation of financial health to prospective investors, deliberate concealment of a liquidity crisis over a period of 26 months. The filing named Harlem directly and named the company. It was the kind of charge that didn't get quietly resolved. It was the kind that went to trial. The IPO was not suspended. It was dead. The company's remaining investors, the ones who had held on through the SEC inquiry, hoping it would resolve, saw the fraud charges and moved fast. By end of trading Friday, Harlem Capital Group had lost 61% of its value from its pre-inquiry peak. The stock was in free fall. The company that Reagan Harlem had spent 30 years building was coming apart in real time, in public, one news alert at a time. The following Thursday morning, Reagan Harlem was arrested at his home. There was no perp walk, no cameras outside the building. 2 federal agents in plain clothes arrived at 7:20 in the morning, and Harlem opened his own front door because his security staff had already been contacted and had been advised, very quietly, to step aside. He was walked to a gray sedan parked at the curb. The door closed. The car pulled away. By noon, every outlet in the city had the story. By 3 in the afternoon, it was national. Derek Valentin, watching the coverage from wherever he had retreated with his immunity agreement, discovered that afternoon that immunity from securities fraud charges did not protect him from the civil lawsuit that Rachel filed on Solana's behalf. Tortious interference with business relations, defamation, and conspiracy. The damages sought were $28 million. Valentin's attorney called Rachel's office before 5 o'clock. The FBI inquiry into Marcus Parvin, which had opened with urgency 3 weeks earlier, closed quietly on a Thursday with no findings and no action. Marcus Parvin's business affairs were, above the surface, immaculate. They always had been. Solana watched the coverage alone in her office that afternoon. The television was on low. Harlem's name moving across the bottom of the screen in the white text of breaking news. His photograph, the charity gala one, the smiling one, running beside the words, "Arrested and fraud and federal charges." She didn't cheer, didn't call anyone, didn't move from her chair. She just sat there in the quiet of her office and breathed, fully, slowly, completely. For the first time since a Tuesday morning in late October, when she had walked into a building carrying a leather portfolio and a navy suit with gold threading, and a man had poured coffee over her head and told her to leave, she breathed, and it felt like everything. The article ran on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Harlem's arrest, 4 weeks after a Friday ruling that had permanently closed a door, 6 weeks after a Tuesday morning in late October when Solana Parvin had walked into a building and walked out of it, changed. The headline read, "She was right all along." It ran in a national business publication, the kind with a long history and a readership that included every person, in every boardroom, in every city that mattered. A full-length profile, 4,000 words. A photograph of Solana taken in her own office, at her own desk, in a suit she had chosen herself. She was looking directly at the camera. Her expression was composed and clear and completely unbothered. She looked exactly like what she was. Paris read it first. She had been sent an advance copy the evening before and had read it at her kitchen table with a glass of wine, and then read it again. She arrived at the office Tuesday morning before anyone else, printed 2 copies, and placed one on Solana's desk. Then she went to her own office, closed the door, and cried. Not sad crying. Not relieved crying, exactly. The kind of crying that happens when something that should always have been true finally gets said out loud in a place where it can't be taken back, when the record gets corrected. when the world catches up to what you already knew. She didn't apologize for it when Solana found her 20 minutes later. Solana looked at her best friend, red-eyed, slightly undone, laughing a little at herself, and said nothing, just put her arms around her and held on. The article covered everything. It covered the boardroom. Solana described it plainly, without drama, without embellishment, because the plain truth was dramatic enough. She described the silence of the men around the table. She described the coffee, the heat of it, the smell of it, the way it felt running down through her head while she stood completely still. She described picking up Gavin's napkin and blotting her face and closing her portfolio and walking out without a word. She described what it cost. Not just financially, though the article covered that too, the clients lost, the contracts cancelled, the reputation campaign that Valentine had engineered. But the other cost, the cost of lying awake at night thinking about 11 people who had built something with her and were watching it be dismantled. The cost of sitting in a dark office and making herself choose the hard way when the fast way was one phone call away. I needed it to be mine, she said in the article. I needed the truth to be what won. Not fear, not someone else's name. The truth. Because I have spent my entire career in rooms that were not built for me, and I was not going to let that man be the reason my victory got credited to someone else. The phone started ringing before 9 o'clock. 11 new client inquiries arrived in the first week. 3 of them were among the largest firms in the city. The kind of firms that Solana had been building toward for years. The kind that didn't make calls like this unless they were certain. Paris managed the intake with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting to do exactly this work for a long time. Gordon Marsh, CFO, was facing criminal perjury charges. His attorney was negotiating. It would not go well for him. The 2 other boardroom witnesses named in the civil suit had both been quietly contacted by their personal insurance attorneys. Neither was sleeping particularly well. Gavin came in on a Wednesday. He sat across from Solana in her office, the same careful posture he'd had at the restaurant, the same quietly decent quality that had made him slide a napkin across a table when every other person in that room had looked away. Solana offered him a position at the firm, a real one, with a real title and a salary that reflected what he was actually worth. He looked at the offer letter for a moment. Then he looked up at her. I should have done more. In the room. You did what you could, Solana said. And then when it mattered more, you did everything. He nodded, picked up the pen, signed. That evening, Solana and Marcus stood on the terrace of their home. The city was spread out below them, all those lights, all that motion, all that noise compressed by distance into something almost peaceful. The air was cold and clean. Somewhere below, the city was doing what it always did, moving, dealing, building, breaking, starting over. Marcus stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. He had said very little since the article ran. He didn't need to say much. He never did. After a while he said, "You said you needed it to be yours." Solana looked out at the city, at all those lights burning against the dark. "It is," she said. He put his arm around her, pulled her close. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." He never said, "I made calls, I moved pieces, I cleared the road." He didn't say any of it, and she didn't ask him to. She knew who she had married. She knew what he had done, and what he had chosen not to do, and exactly where the line had been drawn between his world and hers. She had fought this fight herself. She had won it herself. She had stood in a room with coffee running down her face and walked out without breaking. And 6 weeks later, the man who put it there was in federal custody, and her name was in a national publication, and the record was corrected in a place where it could not be undone. Marcus had made sure the road was clear. She had walked every step of it herself. That was what they had built together. Not just a life, not just an empire, but an understanding of exactly who the other person was, and exactly what they needed, and exactly when to step forward and when to step back. It was, Solana thought, looking out over the city that had tried to swallow her whole, the most valuable thing either of them owned. The city glittered below them. The story ended on a peak. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.